So what to do with your old 401ks? That's what we're going to be talking about today in the webinar. And I'm just going to share my screen to get the presentation up. And this is certainly a common issue, right, for all of us, especially if we're changing jobs throughout our career. We can end up with a bunch of 401ks sitting around and we don't know what to do with them. So that's what we're talking about today. There we go, presentation mode, all good. So first off, who am I? So my name is Joe Morgan. I'm a CFA and a CFP, which is a bunch of letters to say that I've spent my life way too much time studying the financial markets. I do financial planning for folks that have variable income. In other words, people are challenged by cash flows. So that could be somebody heading to retirement or somebody who's compensated through primarily through stock awards. So the compensation is up and down, or somebody who's compensated primarily through commissions. I've spent 25 years managing money for large institutions, endowment funds, corporations. Most recently, I spent 10 years as the chief investment officer at Silicon Valley Bank. And then the last 5 years, I've worked with families here in the Bay Area on their finances. One thing I have to tell you is that what we're talking about today is not financial advice. Financial advice should be specific to you and your situation. It should include everything about you. And I don't know who's on here, right? I don't know you personally. I don't know your situation. So this is not financial advice from a legal perspective. What we're talking about today are simply some general concepts and money moves that might or might not be appropriate for you. I've done several webinars in the past. You can see the titles there down below. If you want to see a replay, just reach out to me and let me know. I'd be happy to share the link. So first off, let me talk a little bit about financial planning, because it's important that we make all of our financial decisions within a planning concept. In other words, a holistic concept, making sure that our entire financial life is getting better and we're not just optimizing one point at the expense of another. And so this is the way I look at your financial life. There's 4 areas here. You see them in the columns. Protect what you have, know where it goes, make it grow. That's what we're talking about today. And retaining independence and dignity, meaning we're not going to live off our kids in our old life. We want to do this with intention and purposeful effort. And what we're trying to do is build our best financial life, not the best financial life on the block, not a life better than our neighbors, but the best life that we personally can achieve. This is my process that I normally go through with clients. In the first year, we spend a lot of time diving into everything. And again, I just want to point out where in the process is. So this is investment strategy. And you can see this is well into the process. This is not the first thing you should be doing. Other things that should be doing before that to put together the plan that's right for you. So enough of that. Let's get into the topic here. What is a 401k? What is a 403b? All of these retirement plans, all of these acronyms and stuff. So what we're talking about are defined contribution plans. And that's very different from a defined benefit plan. We're not even talking about defined benefit plans. We're talking about defined contribution. So this is where the employee and the company are contributing to the fund that will be your retirement fund. So these are funds that you actually own. Like all the money you put in a 401k, you own. The money that your company puts in, as long as it's vested, then you own that, right? It's yours. Nobody can take it away from you. And if you take money out before age 59 and a half, there's a penalty for that. Now, what money that goes into these accounts are typically tax deductible. And then when you take it out, you get taxed on it. But in any case, there's a penalty before 59 and a half. Now, I say typically because you can have a traditional IRA, that's the one that's deductible on the way in, or a Roth IRA. So a traditional is where you get a tax deduction when the money goes in, and then you pay taxes when the money comes out, right? The government gets paid eventually. Employer and employees can contribute to traditional IRA or traditional 401ks. On the Roth side, what we're doing there is we're putting in after-tax money, so we don't get a tax deduction. But here's the good news. You put money in there, you invest it, it grows. That growth is never taxed. So that's one of the few areas where you can actually make money that's completely tax-free. So we like Roth accounts for that reason. Now, those are the laws today. Tax laws, as you know, change frequently, all too frequently. So we don't know what the laws will be tomorrow, but as of today, that's the way the Roth accounts work. There's no tax on withdrawals as long as you follow, the rules. You take it out after age 59 and a half, all the typical stuff for retirement accounts, nothing too surprising there. In the Roth account, those are only employee contributions. So your employer cannot put money in there, which makes sense because the employer wants the tax deduction, right? So they're going to put money in the traditional side. Even if they could put it in the Roth, they'd put it in the traditional side. All right, so that's what a 401k is. Now, let's get to the heart of the matter. What can we do with these old 401ks? Well, there's three options. You can take the money out, in which case you'll pay tax. If you haven't already paid tax, if it's traditional, you'll pay tax. And then of course, there'll be a penalty under age 59 and a half. Now, it might surprise you, but the large proportion of people in this country, that's what they do. When they change a job, they say, oh, that's my money, I need to take it out, and they get taxed, and they don't even really, know what that's all about, and they get hit with a tax bill. I think most people who are on this call, and most people's kind of in this world, probably wouldn't do that. They would know not to take the money out. So what else could we do? We can leave them. You can leave them in the old 401ks. That's fine, but don't forget them, because it's almost a guarantee your old employer will lose touch with you, right? And so it's not like you're going to be getting emails and notifications about, hey, what are you doing with this old 401k? So if it's a few years ago, think back, and if it's a few years ago and you have an old 401k, you might want to look into that if you haven't seen a statement, or if you're not, you don't have a login, all of that. I could still have money out there. The third option is you can roll them into an IRA. So roll that's just an industry term, basically move them. That's all it is. So you can move from your 401k into a new IRA that you create, or into an IRA that already exists. And you can even combine a bunch of old 401ks into a single IRA, and that makes them easier to manage, of course. So now let's talk about that. Let's talk about rolling the 401k. So the pros and cons. So the pros are it's going to be cheaper in an IRA than a 401k. I can almost say that with 100% certainty. 401ks are expensive to run, and they've got to get paid for somehow. They usually don't take the fees directly out of your accounts. What they do is they restrict the investment options to funds and strategies that have fees embedded in them. So you don't really see the fee, but you're paying the fee because you're not getting that extra investment return inside the fund options. So lower fees, that's usually the big reason. The second big reason is to have more options, right? You're not limited by those number of options. You also have more beneficiary options. So a 401k, typically you can name a beneficiary. You might be able to name a subsequent beneficiary, but you can't typically do fancy things like with trusts and all of that. With an IRA, you have full flexibility. Now, I'm not saying you should have your trust as the beneficiary of your 401k or IRA. I'm just saying that it's a little bit more difficult in the 401k. Also, of course, with fewer accounts, these are easy to track and understand. So those are the pros. Consolidate, make your life easier, smaller number of accounts. The pros of keeping the old 401k, now there are a couple there that are important. One is that, remember, at 59 and a half, you have to wait until then to take the money out before paying a penalty. But it's possible in a 401k that you can take it out at age 55. Some certain conditions around that. You have to basically retire. But it's possible you can do that. And then there's conditions on how much you can take out. But you can take it out a little bit earlier. It could leave you with a greater ability to convert other funds to Roth. Now, we're talking about Roth conversions there. So if your money's in 401ks and you have some money in a traditional IRA, it's a little easier to convert that to a Roth than if you're building up funds in your IRAs. So that's one thing to consider. The other thing I think could be important is there's stronger credit protection in a 401k, meaning in California, you're protected up to $1 million in an IRA. but if your money's in a 401k, you could have $20 million in a 401k is protected from creditors in terms of bankruptcy or lawsuit or what have you. Hopefully that's not a problem, but it is something to consider. And you can also take out a loan against your 401k. Depending on the employer, you might even be able to take out a loan after you leave employment. I'm not a fan of taking out a loan on your 401k. I'm just saying that that's an option, and you don't have that option once you roll to an IRA. Okay, so here's another way to look at this. And what I think is important is if you're going to have a long-term investment strategy and you're going to keep it intact over 20, 30, 40 years, that can be a lot of work, right? And so when we want to, combining into a single account will make that easier. The other thing is we have one long-term investment strategy, okay? So if you've seen some of my other webinars, you'll know that I believe in taking a look at your next 5 years expenses on a net basis. So you take your income minus your expenses, include taxes and everything. And if you need to draw funds from your savings, basically in the next 5 years, we want that in a savings account. We don't want that in the investment portfolio, okay? So that's the first 5 years, the next 5 years. Anything we're gonna spend after that is all one thing. It's all one long-term portfolio. It's not divided up into 4 or 5 different buckets, and you don't have the 401k with one strategy and your taxable account with another strategy and your Roth with a third strategy. It's all one strategy. And so the sooner that we can kind of get those combined, the easier it's going to be to manage that. Now we can optimize our investments by location, right? Because the different types of accounts are taxed differently, right? So we want our high dividend investments in a tax deferred or a Roth account. We don't want them in a taxable account. And we want our low dividend, low turnover funds in a taxable account. So we can do that, but we always want to view the strategy by combining everything. All right, so how do we do this? How do we consolidate our 401ks? It's easy, but it can take time. And so here's why it's easy. The industry is really good about this. So if you want to combine your 401ks, let's say you have a Fidelity 401k, a Morgan Stanley 401k, you got 401ks everywhere, right? And so you open it, and let's say you want to combine them into an IRA at Vanguard. Here's what you do. You call up Vanguard and you say, this is what I want to do. Please walk me through it. And they'll take care of it. You don't ever have to talk to Fidelity. You don't ever have to talk to Morgan Stanley. You don't have to talk to those guys where your accounts are. You can deal with that one company where your funds are headed, and they will walk you through the process. Now, it will take some time because there's a lot of paperwork. And of course, you got to prove your identity. And then they've got to, Vanguard has to communicate with those other firms and all of that. But at the end of the day, you'll end up holding one account with all of your 401ks. And you only have to talk to one person or one group to get it done. It may take more than one phone call, that is. Let's see, they all have their own unique process. So that's the deal, right? You just let Vanguard take care of it or wherever you're headed with your accounts. All right, so some important tips here. Let's definitely keep our Roth and traditional IRA balances separate, right? And so in a 401k, depending on your employer, you might already have a Roth and a traditional 401k separate if you have funds in both. But oftentimes they'll be in one pool. And so it's up to you to communicate with the provider, the fund manager, to get the right delineation of how much is Roth and how much is traditional for when you move it out. So that can be a little bit tricky. So something you want to be careful of if you have some Roth money when you're moving funds out. The other thing is you want to understand whether you have basis in your IRAs. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, do you have any money in your traditional IRAs that's after tax? Remember, it's all typically pre-tax money, but sometimes we can get some after-tax money in an IRA. We want to know about that before we start moving things around, because we can cause some tax events that won't be a whole lot of fun. So let's be careful about that. And then the third thing is to be careful about the 60-day rollover rule. So there's a lot of different names for this. Some people say they're taking a loan from their IRA for 60 days. Here's what it is. When you move money from one IRA to another, or from a 401k to an IRA, you can do it two ways. You can do it where you never touch the money, you never see the money goes from one account to the other. from one institution to the other, and you never see it. That's the best way to do it. Okay, that's the easiest, best way. But the IRS does give you this option. You can take a check from your old 401k or IRA, cash it, put it in your savings account, and you have 60 days to put it into a new IRA, right? So that's why people call it a loan from their IRA. It's only a 2-month loan, but the IRS is really tight on this. So, and some of this paperwork, as I mentioned, can take time. If you end up getting the money in the new account on day 61, the IRS is going to tax you on the whole amount, and they're going to hit you for a penalty for contributing to an IRA when you weren't allowed to, because they're going to rule that withdrawal as an actual withdrawal as opposed to this 60-day rollover if you go beyond the 60 days. So I'd prefer you not to go there or not have to go there. I hope that's the case. But I want you to be aware of it because it is important. All right, so that's pretty much all the content I have for today.